Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. Instead of drifting off to some faraway fantasy or heroic tale, we're going to get real brutally, itchily, uncomfortably real about why you, yes you, wouldn't last a single day in medieval times. Picture this. It's barely dawn, and you're already losing. The air smells like wet hay, burning tallow, and something suspiciously like a goat's bad decision. You're not in your cozy bed anymore. You're on a lumpy sack of straw that at least 3 other people have sweat into, and the fleas? Oh, they've already declared war. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake, but there's no snooze button. No iPhone light burning your retinas. Just gray pre-sunrise gloom and the sound of a rooster that definitely has a personal vendetta against sleep. You try to stretch, but your back cracks in places you didn't know could crack. That mattress you're on? It's stuffed with straw that's been reused since Charlemagne was in diapers, and it rustles ominously every time you move. One wrong shift, and a sharp piece of barley stalk stabs you through your thin linen shift. And the smell? Oh, the smell. You're hit with a cocktail of body odor, damp wool, and the faint but persistent reek of last night's chamber pot, which, by the way, is just a bucket in the corner. There's no bathroom. There's barely a room. You share this space with at least 2 other people, possibly a chicken, and a lurking sense of medieval despair. You sit up, swatting at a flea that's already made a home in your elbow crease. Personal hygiene? Forget it. Soap exists, but it's made of ash and animal fat, and using it feels like scrubbing with a candle. Your hair is a nest of yesterday's grime, and your teeth, well, let's just say minty freshness won't be invented for another 600 years. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages knew they smelled bad, or just accepted it as God's cruel joke. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some nobles tried to mask the stench by carrying around little pouches of herbs, medieval airwick, if you will. Meanwhile, the common folk just marinated. You stumble to your feet, knees popping like a bowl of medieval Rice Krispies. The floor is packed dirt, cold and slightly damp, because insulation is a luxury reserved for castles and cathedrals. Your clothes from yesterday's scratchy wool, because linen is for fancy people, are still draped over a stool, stiff with dried sweat. Putting them back on feels like wearing a burlap sack lined with sandpaper. And then there's the noise. Outside your hovel, the village is already alive with the sound of misery. A blacksmith's hammer clangs like a metronome for purgatory. Sheep bleat like they're auditioning for a horror movie. And somewhere, a baby is wailing, because medieval infants didn't believe in sleeping through the night. You shuffle toward the door, tripping over a loose floorboard that's been tripped over since the Norman conquest. Stepping outside, you're greeted by a sky the color of unwashed dishwater. The sun is technically up, but it's putting in the bare minimum effort, like a medieval peasant on tax day. A gust of wind hits you, carrying the aroma of the communal dung heap. Ah, yes, the village's pride and joy. It's where all the fertilizer comes from, and by fertilizer, I mean a steaming pile of everything nobody wanted to deal with. But hey, At least it's not inside your house. Small mercies. Your stomach growls. Breakfast should be simple, right? Wrong. You open the pantry and stare at your options. Stale bread harder than a knight's moral code. A wedge of cheese that may or may not be alive, and a jug of ale. Because water, that's basically liquid death. Even the ale is safer, and it tastes like fermented bread soup. You gnaw on the bread like a beaver trying to down a tree. It's a workout for your jaw, but at least it distracts you from the fact that your socks are damp. Because, oh yeah, footwear in the Middle Ages was basically just leather sacks for your feet. Waterproofing? That's what puddles are for. And this is just morning. You haven't even tried to work yet. That breakfast sits in your stomach like a rock wrapped in regret. You stare into the bottom of your ale jug, hoping for some kind of medieval espresso to kick in, but no such luck. The bread has officially declared war on your molars, and the cheese, well, let's just say it blinked at you. Time to face the day. You step outside again, this time with purpose. The village is fully awake now, which means the smell has upgraded from questionable to actively hostile. That dung heap you admired earlier? It's now a thriving ecosystem, buzzing with flies the size of raisins. A pig roots through what you hope is mud near the communal well, and you make a mental note to boil your water twice. Or maybe just stick to ale forever. Your first task, fetching water. Sounds simple, right? The well is a wobbly stone circle with a bucket that's seen better centuries. You lower it down, rope groaning like a haunted house sound effect, and wait for the splash. When you haul it back up, the water is suspiciously cloudy. A leaf floats in it. So does something that might be a bug or might just be extra protein. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants cared about floaties or just chugged and prayed. Here's a fun fact. Some villages added ale or vinegar to their water to purify it, because nothing says clean drinking water like the tang of sour beer. You sigh and take a cautious sip. It tastes like a pond's backwash, but hey, at least it's not dysentery. Yet. As you're pondering water safety, a chicken pecks at your foot like it's judging your life choices. Chickens were the original free-range pets, wandering wherever they pleased and pooping with reckless abandon. You shoo it away, only to nearly step in something warm and fresh from the village's other residents. The ones with hooves. The street is bustling now. A baker shouts about his fresh bread, 3 days old. But who's counting? While a fishmonger proudly displays his catch of the day, eels so slimy they could lubricate a drawbridge. You sidestep a puddle that may or may not contain actual sewage in medieval towns. It was basically a guessing game. Suddenly a horn blares. The tax collector is coming. Your stomach drops faster than a failed siege engine. He's here for his quarterly harvest of your meager supplies, and he's not taking Venmo. You could try hiding your grain, but if he finds it, the punishment involves things you'd rather not think about before lunch. Speaking of lunch, oh wait, you don't get lunch. Not really. Maybe some more bread if you're lucky, or if you're very lucky, a thin stew that's 90% mystery and 10% hope. Historians dig through medieval cookbooks and still can't agree on what blankmanger actually was. Your stomach growls again, louder this time. That bread from breakfast is now staging a protest in your intestines. You glance longingly at the baker's stall, but your coin purse is emptier than a leper's social calendar. Time to get to work. The tax collector's horse leaves hoof-shaped indents in the mud as he trots away with half your grain, your actual grain, not the weevil-infested stuff you hid under the floorboards like a medieval coupon clipper. You wipe your brow with a sleeve that smells like wet sheep and turn toward your daily labor, which today involves, well, you're not entirely sure. That is the fun of feudalism. Your job description is basically whatever the Lord says it is. A shout rings out from the blacksmith's hut. That's your cue. You trudge over, ducking under a low-hanging sign that reads the old OSH, a violation. Inside, the heat hits you like a dragon's sneeze. The smith, a mountain of a man with forearms thicker than your thighs, jerks his chin toward the bellows. Pump, he grunts, like he's allergic to vowels, so you pump, and pump, and pump some more. The fire roars, turning your face the color of a boiled lobster, while your arms scream like a tortured peasant. The smith hammers a glowing piece of metal, sending sparks flying toward your tunic. One lands on your sleeve, and you watch in horror as it eats through the fabric like a tiny, rabid sun. The smith doesn't even glance up. This is just Tuesday for him. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Blacksmiths were the rock stars of the Middle Ages. Without them, villages would have collapsed faster than a poorly built siege tower. But here's the quirky bit. Some smiths were believed to have magical powers, probably because they turned rocks into tools while everyone else was just trying not to die of the sniffles. Your hands are blistered now, the bellows handle slick with sweat. You're pretty sure your spine has fused into a single aching curve. Just as you consider faking your own death, the smith nods at a pile of scrap metal. Sort. You stare at the heap. It's mostly rust and regret. As you poke through it, a spider the size of a small coin scuttles over your finger. You yelp and fling it into the fire, which feels both justified and slightly sacrilegious after all. Spiders were thought to carry the plague. The hours crawl by like a snail with a grievance. Your stomach, now hosting a full-blown rebellion, lets out a noise that makes the smith's apprentice giggle. Lunch is a distant dream, but the smith finally takes pity and tosses you a hunk of bread soaked in something. It might be broth. It might be axle grease. You eat it anyway, because hunger is the best sauce. As you chew, a commotion erupts outside. A cart has overturned, spilling turnips everywhere. The village dogs descend like fuzzy vultures, while the carter swears in creative dialects you didn't know existed. A nun shakes her head and mutters about moral decay, which seems rich coming from someone who hasn't smelled your armpits lately. The smith grunts again. This time, it's the medieval equivalent of shifts over. You stumble out, blinking in the sunlight like a mole person. Your back is ruined, your hands are wrecked, and you've inhaled enough soot to cough up a chimney. But hey, you've earned, let's see, 3 copper pennies. Enough to buy half a chicken. Or more likely, another loaf of bread that could double as a building material. As you pocket your earnings, a shadow falls over you. It's the priest, his robes flapping like ominous curtains. The tithe, he reminds you, palm outstretched. Right, God's cut. You surrender a penny, trying not to weep as it clinks into his pouch. 1 coin left. Time to decide, food now or save up for the world's saddest retirement plan. Your stomach votes loudly. You turn toward the market, where the baker is now hawking yesterday's bread at a discount. It looks like a brick and smells like regret, but it's all you can afford. As you hand over your last coin, a drop of rain hits your nose. Then another. Within seconds, it's pouring, the kind of rain that laughs at your pathetic straw roof. You clutch your bread to your chest like a treasure and break into a run, dodging puddles that may or may not contain the Black Death. By the time you reach your hovel, you're drenched. The bread is now a soggy sponge, your tunic is glued to your skin, and your one pair of shoes squelches with every step. You collapse onto your straw mattress, which immediately pokes you in the kidney. And the worst part, it's not even sunset yet. The rain drums a relentless rhythm on your roof, or rather, the patchwork of thatch and hope that passes for a roof. Water drips strategically onto your left foot, while a puddle forms near the door like an uninvited guest. You gnaw on your damp bread, which now has the texture of a dish sponge left in the rain, and contemplate the cruel irony of being both starving and unable to eat your only food. A wet chicken struts past the doorway, clucking judgmentally. You consider shooing it out, but then realize this might be your chance for actual protein. The thought of chasing a chicken through the mud in the pouring rain almost makes you laugh. Almost. Instead, you flop onto your back and stare at the ceiling, where a spider is spinning a web with more structural integrity than your entire house. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants even had downtime, or if they just worked until they'd passed out face first in a field. But here as a quirky tidbit, some records show they actually had more vacation days than modern workers, thanks to all those saints' days and church-mandated breaks. Of course, vacation meant not doing back-breaking labor, not sipping ale on a beach. A gust of wind howls through the cracks in your walls, blowing out your single candle. Now you're eating mystery bread in the dark like some kind of sad medieval raccoon. Outside, the village dogs start howling, never a good sign. Then you hear it, the unmistakable squelch of approaching footsteps. The door creaks open without so much as a knock, revealing your neighbor, Old Tom. He's soaked to the bone, his beard dripping like a leaky gutter. "Pigs loose again," he announces, as if this explains everything. You sigh. This is the third time this month. The village pig, a monstrous beast named Buttercup with a penchant for destruction, has escaped her pen and is currently terrorizing Widow Agnes' herb garden. By unspoken peasant law, this means everyone within a 5-house radius must drop everything and form a search party. You pull your hood up and trudge back into the storm. The rain has turned the path into a chocolate-colored slurry that sucks at your shoes with every step. In the distance, you hear Agnes shrieking what might be curses, or might just be the medieval equivalent of "I beheaded up to here, Buttercup." The hunt begins. You and Tom split up. You take the area near the tannery, while Tom heads toward the mill. You're armed with nothing but a stick and bad decisions, squinting through the downpour for any sign of the rogue swine. Then there, a rustling in the bush. You creep forward, heart pounding like a tavern drum. The rustling grows louder. You raise your stick, ready to face the beast, and a very disgruntled goose waddles out, hissing at you like you're the one trespassing. You nearly weep with frustration. Just as you're about to give up, a triumphant shout rings out from the direction of the grain store. By the time you arrive, half the village is gathered around Buttercup, who is cheerfully devouring next week's bread supply. The baker is waving his arms like a windmill. The priest is muttering about demonic possession, and Agnes is brandishing a broom like a knight with a lance. It takes 6 grown adults to corral Buttercup back to her pen. You wind up covered in mud with a suspicious bite mark on your sleeve that you hope came from the pig. As thanks for your service, Agnes presses a small pouch of mint into your hand. For the stench, she says, wrinkling her nose in your general direction. You stumble home as the rain finally eases. Your clothes are beyond salvation. Your shoes will never be the same. And you're pretty sure you pulled something in your back during the great pig chase of 1362. But, hey, at least you've got mint. You toss the herbs onto your shelf and collapse onto your bed. Just as your eyes start to close, a flea bites your ankle. Tomorrow can't possibly be worse. The rooster's crow jolts you awake, not that you were sleeping deeply. Between the flea bites, the straw poking your kidneys, and the lingering fear that Buttercup might stage another midnight jailbreak, your night's rest was about as peaceful as a jousting tournament. You peel open gummy eyelids to discover a new horror: sunlight. Glorious, unfiltered sunlight pouring through the holes in your roof like nature's cruel spotlight on your misery. You roll off the mattress and immediately step into last night's rainwater puddle. Your left foot is now a cold, soggy mess. The mint Agnes gave you sits pathetically on the shelf, its fresh scent no match for the bouquet of wet wool, unwashed human. And whatever that smell is coming from the corner. Breakfast is the same as yesterday's stale bread and the dregs of your ale. The bread has somehow gotten harder overnight, possibly evolving into a new form of building material. You gnaw at it like a beaver attacking a tree, briefly wondering if this is how your teeth will eventually meet their end. The ale, now warm and suspiciously fizzy, does little to wash down the sawdust-like crumbs coating your tongue. Today's agenda: field work, because nothing says good morning like backbreaking agricultural labor under the medieval sun. You trudge out to find the village already buzzing, the blacksmith's hammer ringing, children chasing chickens, and the ever-present background chorus of barking dogs and bleating sheep. Your lord's steward stands near the fields, his ledger book open, and a look of mild disappointment permanently etched onto his face. He sizes you up as you approach, his gaze lingering on your still damp tunic. Section 7 needs weeding, he announces, as if this sentence doesn't contain multitudes of suffering. Section 7 is the slope at the far edge of the demesne, the part where the soil is mostly rocks and resentment. The walk there alone is enough to make you question all your life choices. You pass the mill pond, its surface green with algae, and try not to think about what might be lurking beneath. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually believed in water spirits or just really hated swimming in questionable ponds. The weeds have apparently been having a festival in Section 7. They wave cheerfully at you as you approach, their roots dug in like tiny botanical anarchists. You're handed a hoe that's seen better centuries, the handle splintered, the metal edge duller than a sermon on fasting days. Within minutes, your hands are blistered. Within an hour, your back feels like it's been used as a trebuchet counterweight. The sun beats down mercilessly, and you realize with dawning horror that you forgot to bring water. Your tongue feels like it's been lined with the same wool as your tunic. A shadow falls across your work. It's Marjorie, the shepherd's daughter, holding out a water skin with an expression that says she pities you, but also finds your suffering mildly amusing. You grab it greedily, only to discover it's not water but small beer, the low-alcohol brew that passes for hydration. It tastes like someone whispered the word hops near some barley water, but at this point you drink water from the mill pond if it came with a straw. Seen the new folks? Marjorie asks, nodding toward the road where a dusty cart approaches. Travelers mean news and possibly trouble. You both watch as a family trudges into town, their belongings piled high on a creaky wagon. The man looks exhausted. The woman is clutching a baby, and 3 children peer out with wide eyes. Refugees from the next county over, fleeing some noble's latest squabble that's turned their fields into battlegrounds. The steward appears, already calculating how much more grain these new mouths will consume. You return to your weeding with renewed vigor. Suddenly, your blisters don't seem so bad. At least your village hasn't been burned to the ground, yet. By midday, your hands are a lost cause. You've been stabbed by thistles, attacked by ants, and pretty sure you just inhaled a gnat. The sun has moved approximately 3 centimeters in the sky. Time moves differently when you're re-engaged in medieval agriculture, each minute stretching like a tortured peasant on the rack. The church bell rings for noon prayers, your signal to down tools and shuffle to the chapel. You kneel on the hard stone floor, your knees popping loudly enough to earn a glare from the priest. The Latin washes over you as you surreptitiously pick dirt from under your nails and try not to think about lunch. After what feels like 3 lifetimes, you're released back to the fields. The afternoon passes in a haze of sweat, dirt, and increasingly creative curses muttered under your breath. When the steward finally calls an end to the day's labor, you straighten up with a series of pops that sound like a walnut being cracked in slow motion. As you drag yourself home, you pass the newcomers building their shelter at the edge of the village. The children are already chasing Buttercup, who seems delighted by fresh victims. You pause just long enough to catch a scrap of conversation, heard the fighting's getting closer, before moving on, suddenly grateful for your flea-ridden but still standing hovel. Dinner is a thin pottage that's mostly onions and regret, with a hunk of your indestructible bread to soak it up. You eat in silence, listening to the sounds of the village settling for the night, the clucking of chickens returning to roost, the distant laughter from the tavern, the ever-present barking of dogs. As you collapse onto your straw mattress, one thought keeps circling your mind. Only 11 more hours until you get to do it all again. The church bell's mournful toll drags you from sleep like a reluctant corpse rising for Judgment Day. Every muscle screams in protest as you roll off your straw. Mattress yesterday's field labor has left your body a tapestry of aches. A spider scuttles across your hand in what feels like a deliberate power move. You blink crusty eyes toward the doorway where golden dawn light filters through the cracks in a cruel mockery of invitation. Breakfast is the usual suspects. Bread that could double as a roofing tile, and ale that has gone from questionable to downright philosophical overnight. You're halfway through gnawing your meal when a thunderous pounding shakes your door. Before you can answer, it flies open to reveal the miller's son, red-faced and panting. "Barn's on fire." He gasps. "Of course it is." You sprint outside to find half the village already forming a bucket brigade toward the billowing smoke. The thatched roof of Old Tome's storage barn is fully alight, flames dancing merrily against the morning sky. Someone thrusts a leather bucket into your hands and shoves you toward the mill pond, that same algae-choked death trap you passed yesterday. The water is colder than a witch's heart as you plunge the bucket in. By your fifth trip, your arms feel like overcooked noodles, but the fire shows no signs of surrendering. The village priest stands to one side, loudly debating whether this is divine punishment or just really bad luck. Historians still argue about medieval interpretations of disaster. Was it God's wrath, or just that time Thomas forgot to douse his lantern properly? Between panting breaths, you notice Widow Agnes directing operations with the precision of a battlefield general. She's got children carrying buckets, old men moving livestock, and even convinced Buttercup to relocate without causing her usual property damage. You make a mental note never to cross Agnes. After what feels like a lifetime, the fire burns itself out, leaving behind a sad skeleton of blackened beams and the pungent smell of regret. The village gathers around the ruins like mourners at a funeral, while Old Tom stares blankly at what remains of his winter stores. This is when you notice it, the suspicious absence of the miller's cat, a notorious pyromaniac who's been caught knocking over candles before. The miller swears up and down that Mittens was safely locked up, but the sideways glances from the villagers tell a different story. As the crowd disperses, the steward appears with his ever-present ledger. He surveys the damage with the enthusiasm of a man calculating exactly how much extra work this will create for everyone. New roof needed by Lammas, he announces, which gives you exactly 3 weeks to become an expert thatcher. The rest of the morning is spent salvaging what can be saved from the wreckage. You're elbow deep in sooty grain sacks when the traveling peddler arrives. Perfect timing, as always. His cart jingles with promises of remedies and luxuries, drawing villagers like flies to honey. You watch as Agnes haggles fiercely over a bolt of linen, while the miller's wife examines a suspicious-looking dragon-esque tooth that is probably just a cow molar. The peddler catches your eye and holds up a small jar. "Salve for burns," he proclaims. "Made by monks, secret recipe." You glance down at your soot-streaked arms and seriously consider your 2 remaining coins. Then you remember you still owe the church their tithe next week and sigh. Lunch is a communal affair by the smoldering ruins. What bread survived the fire, and some cheese that may have been improved by the heat. You're picking charcoal out of your meal when the priest clears his throat. "There's the matter of the roof," he begins, and just like that, you're volunteered for the thatching party. So much for your plans to nap in the fields later. The afternoon passes in a blur of cutting reeds by the riverbank back bent, hands raw and the sun doing its best to roast you alive. The other workers swap increasingly exaggerated theories about the fire's origins. By the time the church bell rings for vespers, you're swaying on your feet, your tunic stiff with sweat and river muck. Dinner is a thin soup that tastes vaguely of smoke, eaten in near darkness because your candle stubs ran out yesterday. As you collapse onto your mattress, your blistered hands throb in time with your heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks incessantly. You almost asleep when a new sound joins the night, the unmistakable jingle of the peddler's cart leaving town. With your last conscious thought, you wonder if that burned salve was really worth 2 coins. And then the flea circus starts its nightly performance, and all wondering ceases. The pre-dawn chill seeps into your bones as you shuffle toward the river, your breath puffing in ghostly clouds. Today's fresh hell laundry day. Not the throw a dash pod dash in dash the dash machine dash and dash press dash start kind, but the medieval version, which involves beating your clothes with rocks until they surrender. The riverbank is already crowded with village women who eye your clumsy approach with poorly concealed amusement. Marjorie takes pity on you, demonstrating the proper technique. You've got to smack it like it owes you money. You swing your washing paddle with enthusiasm, immediately splashing yourself in the face with icy water. The women cackle as you sputter. This is clearly the most entertainment they've ever had since Thomas S. Donkey got stuck in the ale barrel. Your tunic, already questionable before this abuse, begins to fray at the edges under the assault. As you wring it out, you notice the water running suspiciously brown. Just how dirty were you? A passing duck gives you a look of avian disapproval before paddling quickly away. Historians still argue whether medieval people were constantly filthy or just had different standards of cleanliness. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some enterprising souls actually used stale urine as a bleaching agent for laundry. You eye your now slightly less gray tunic with newfound suspicion. The morning passes in a blur of wet fabric and forearm fatigue. By the time you drag your semi-clean clothes back to your hovel, your hands are pruned and numb. Hanging everything to dry presents its own challenges. Your clothesline is just a rope stretched between two posts that sags dramatically under the weight of your damp tunic as you wrestle with a particularly rebellious sleeve. Buttercup the pig wanders by and gives your laundry a thoughtful sniff. You make shooing motions until she loses interest and trots off to terrorize someone else's washing. The harvest horn blares before dawn, its mournful wail slicing through your thin blanket of sleep. You jolt upright only to immediately regret it as every muscle from yesterday's laundry battle screams in protest. Outside, the village stirs like a grumpy beast, the clatter of tools and sleepy curses filling the crisp morning air. You pull on your damp tunic with a grimace and stumble toward the fields. The sickle in your hand feels unnaturally heavy, its curved blade glinting dully in the pre-dawn light. Around you, villagers trudge in silent resignation, their breath puffing ghostly in the chill. The steward stands at the field's edge like a general surveying his troops. With a dramatic flourish of his ledger, he assigns plots. Your section is the far northwest corner naturally, the part with the thickest thistles and the rockiest soil. As you take your position, the first rays of sunlight crest the horizon, painting the sea of golden wheat in deceptively beautiful tones. Then the work begins. The sickle's blade bites into the stalks with a satisfying swish, but within minutes your back protests the constant bending. Your makeshift hand wraps help somewhat, but already you can feel blisters forming. Around you, the more experienced villagers move with rhythmic efficiency, their sickles flashing in steady arcs while you flail like a drunken reaper. By mid-morning, your world has narrowed to an endless cycle of grab-slice bundle. The sun, now fully awake, bakes your neck as sweat rivers down your spine. A tickle on your forearm reveals a line of ants marching determinedly toward your sleeve cuff. You shake them off with a shudder small mercies. At least they're not the biting kind. Historians still argue whether harvest time was a communal bonding experience or just backbreaking labor with better PR. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some villages employed harvest horns like the one that woke you, not just for signaling, but because blowing them was believed to encourage the crops to grow better next year. You eye the steward's horn with newfound resentment. The church bell tolls noon, and the field workers collapse in exhausted heaps along the margins. Someone passes around a skin of small beer, warm and flat, but wet enough to soothe your parched throat. You chew listlessly on your bread, watching as the miller's children catch grasshoppers in the stubble. One particularly bold insect launches itself at your face, and your flailing arms earn a round of laughter from nearby workers. The afternoon passes in a haze of heat and repetition. Your hands have gone beyond blisters to a sort of numb resignation. Just when you think you can't bend one more time, a shout goes up from the eastern edge of the field. A fight has broken out between two of the itinerant workers, something about a stolen whetstone. They roll in the stubble like angry bears while the villagers place bets. The steward finally intervenes with a well-placed kick to someone's backside, and order is restored, but not before half your afternoon productivity is lost to the spectacle. As the sun dips low, painting the field in golden relief, the steward makes his inspection. He pauses at your section, eyebrow raised at the uneven stubble and poorly bundled sheaves. With a sigh that speaks volumes, he marks something in his ledger, probably docking your pay in imaginary medieval HR paperwork. The walk back to the village is a slow parade of the exhausted and the aching. You pass the manor house where the lord's family dines al fresco, their laughter floating over the scent of roasted meat that makes your stomach growl painfully. The contrast between their feast and your meager supper of pottage is almost comical. Back in your hovel, you inspect the damaged hands, raw, back stiff, and a sunburn that's just beginning to announce itself. As you collapse onto your mattress, a single thought cuts through the exhaustion. Tomorrow you get to do it all again. Somewhere in the distance, the harvest horn sounds once more, whether in celebration or warning. You can't quite tell. The harvest horn's second-day blare is somehow more offensive than the first. Your body revolts the moment you try to move muscles you didn't know existed, scream in protest. Your hands have stiffened into claw-like shapes overnight, and that sunburn has blossomed into an impressive shade of boiled lobster. Rolling off your mattress requires a maneuver usually reserved for elderly knights in full-plate armor. Breakfast is a hurried affair of bread and a gulp of ale that he's developing an interesting vinegar quality. You shuffle toward the fields like a condemned man, passing the blacksmith's apprentice who takes one look at you and bursts out laughing. First harvest? He wheezes between giggles. You glare with all the menace your sleep-deprived, pain-riddled body can muster, which isn't much. The field looks different in the harsh morning, lightless golden sea of plenty, more battlefield after the carnage. Your section from yesterday stands out like a sore thumb, the stubble uneven where you hacked at it with all the finesse of a berserker in a wheat field. The steward gives you a look that says he is reconsidering humanity's potential as he assigns you to a new plot, this time sandwiched between Marjorie and old Tom, presumably so they can supervise your incompetence. Marjorie takes pity on you, demonstrating the proper sickle technique again. You're not chopping wood, she chides, adjusting your grip. It's more like persuading the stalks to lie down. Her own movements are poetry in motion, each swing precise, each step calculated. You try to mimic her and immediately slice into your own ankle wrap. By mid-morning, you've developed a grudging rhythm. Bend, swing, step. Bend, swing, step. The monotony is almost meditative, if not for the symphony of complaints from your body. A blister pops on your palm, the sting momentarily cutting through the haze of repetition. You wipe your hand on your tunic, adding another stain to its already questionable tapestry. Historians still argue whether medieval harvests were truly communal efforts or just individually miserable experiences that happened to occur simultaneously. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some villages employed harvest lords, workers temporarily given authority to organize the harvest, complete with mock titles and ceremonies. You glance at the steward with his ever-present ledger and decide. You take a harvest lord over this micromanagement any day. The noon break brings blessed relief. You collapse in the shade of a hedgerow, legs splayed like a broken doll. Someone passes around a wheel of cheese that's seen better days, yet veined with something blue and assertive. But at this point you'd eat the mold alone if it came with a nap. As you gnaw, you watch the children playing in the stubble, their energy a stark contrast to the adults' exhaustion. A commotion erupts near the road. The traveling brewer has arrived with his cart of ale, timing his visit with predatory precision. The steward looks pained as workers immediately begin bartering for liquid relief. You re-weighing your last coin against the desperate need for painkillers when Marjorie nudges you with her foot. "Don't," she mutters. "That's the same batch that made everyone see double at midsummer." The afternoon passes in a blur of heat and repetition. Your world narrows to the patch of wheat before you, each swing of the sickle measured against a growing ache in your shoulders. At some point you become aware of singing the harvest hymn, rising and falling across the field, its simple melody keeping time with the work. Without thinking, you find yourself humming along, the rhythm sensing with your movements. As the sun begins its descent, something miraculous happens. You realize you're actually getting better at this. Your sheaves are neater, your rows more even. Old Tom nods approvingly at your latest bundle, and the unexpected praise warms you more than the ale ever could. The walk back to the village feels different tonight. There's laughter in the air, a sense of shared accomplishment. Even the steward's ledger marking seems less ominous. At the edge of the field, someone has built a small fire, and the smell of roasting onions makes your stomach growl. Back in your hovel, you inspect your hands with something like pride beneath the pain. The blisters are impressive, the dirt ground permanently into your nail beds, but they're a working person's hands now. As you drift off to sleep, the harvest hymn still echoing in your mind, you realize with some surprise that tomorrow will be your last day in the fields. The thought brings an unexpected pang, not of relief, but something suspiciously like nostalgia. You dismiss it immediately. Clearly you've been in the sun too long. Final harvest dawn arrives with a cruel twist rain. Not the gentle, refreshing kind, but the relentless, soak you to the bone variety that turns the fields into a muddy slog. The horn sounds as usual, but its note is dampened by the downpour, like even the instrument can't muster full enthusiasm today. You pull on your now familiar work, clothed stiff with dried sweat and decorated with an impressive collection of grass stains, and hesitate at the doorway. The path to the fields has transformed into a chocolate-colored river. Taking a deep breath, you plunge in, immediately regretting every life choice that led you to this moment as icy water seeps through your shoe seams. The field is a study in misery. Workers huddle under makeshift shelters of cloaks and woven branches, their sickles flashing half-heartedly through the rain. Your section is the wettest part of the field, naturally a low-lying patch where water pools with malicious enthusiasm. Every step sucks at your feet with a wet slurp that would be comical if you weren't living it. Marjorie appears beside you, her usually braided hair plastered to her face like seaweed. "They'll call it off if it gets worse," she shouts over the drumming rain. As if on cue, a spectacular lightning bolt splits the sky, followed by thunder that shakes the ground. The steward makes a hurried sign of the cross and waves everyone back toward the village. The retreat becomes a chaotic scramble. Workers slip and slide through the mud, their harvest enthusiasm thoroughly extinguished. You're halfway back when disaster strikes. Your foot catches on a hidden root, sending you face first into a puddle with all the grace of a falling cow. The resulting splash soaks 3 nearby workers, who respond with language that would make the priest faint. By the time you slosh into the village, you're barely recognizable under a layer of mud. The baker takes one look at you and wordlessly holds out a loaf, not for purchase, but as a makeshift washcloth. You scrape the worst of the muck off your face as children point and giggle. Even Buttercup seems to judge you from her dry spot under the eaves. With the harvest temporarily halted, the village improvises. The blacksmith's forge becomes an impromptu drying station, workers huddled around its warmth like moths to a flame. Someone produces a dented flask of something strong enough to peel paint, and it makes the rounds with solemn ceremony. When it reaches you, you take a swig that burns all the way down and leaves your eyes watering, but at least you can't feel your toes anymore. Historians still argue whether medieval people cared about working in the rain, or just accepted it as part of life as rich tapestry of suffering. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some harvest contracts specifically mention rain days, either docking pay for lost time or requiring makeup work later. You glance at the steward, who's currently arguing with the miller about something, and hope this village follows the former tradition. As the afternoon wears on, the rain eases to a drizzle. The workers disperse to various dry-ish spots, the church porch, the tavern, anywhere with a roof. You find yourself squeezed into Widow Annes's cottage with a half-dozen others, listening to old Tom spin increasingly improbable stories about past harvests. And then the hailstones came down big as goose eggs. He claims, hands sketching dramatic arcs in the air, knocked clean the hat off Father Clement. The group erupts in laughter, though you suspect this story grows with each retelling. Agnes serves small cups of her infamous herbal brew. One sip makes your eyebrows attempt to flee your face, but it does wonders for chasing away the chill. When the church bell rings for vespers, the rain has stopped, leaving the world smelling of wet earth and possibility. The steward makes the rounds, announcing an early start tomorrow to make up for lost time. There's grumbling, but it's half-hearted. Everyone knows the harvest must be finished before the real autumn storms begin. Back in your hovel, you peel off your sodden clothes with the delicacy of someone handling live snakes. Your mattress has developed a suspicious damp spot in your absence, but at this point you're too tired to care. As you collapse onto it, a single thought cuts through the exhaustion. Only one more day. Outside, the village drips itself dry, the occasional plink of water from the thatch providing a lullaby. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its evening song. as if the world hasn't just spent the day being utterly miserable. You're almost asleep when it hits you. You never did get that mud out of your ear. The harvest horn, as final call, splits the morning air with a note of triumph, or maybe that has just your imagination. Your body protests as you roll out of bed, every muscle stiff from yesterday's mud wrestling match with the field. The blisters on your hands have hardened into something resembling armor, though the sunburn on your neck still smarts like a jealous lover's pinch. Breakfast is the usual fare, but today you chew with purpose. This is it, the last push. Outside, the village hums with nervous energy. The storm has left the fields gleaming, droplets clinging to the remaining wheat like tiny jewels. It would be beautiful if you weren't about to massacre it. The steward stands at the field's edge like a conquering general, his ledger already open to today's condemnations. He assigned you to the final southwest corner, the section everyone has been avoiding because it has half brambles. Marjorie shoots you a sympathetic glance as you trudge toward your botanical doom. The first swing of your sickle meets immediate resistance. The brambles have woven themselves through the wheat with the determination of a siege army. Every stalk requires 3 times the effort, thorns snagging your sleeves and skin with equal enthusiasm. By mid-morning, your tunic looks like it lost a fight with a dozen tiny daggers, and your arms are decorated with scratches that sting in the sweat. A shadow falls across your work. It's old Tom, holding out a flask with a knowing grin. For the pain, he says. You take a cautious sip. It's not ale, but some herbal concoction that tastes like a forest floor but makes your fingertips tingle pleasantly. Within minutes, the thorns seem less sharp, the sun less brutal. You make a mental note to ask Tom for the recipe, then immediately forget as a particularly vengeful bramble lashes your wrist. Historians still argue whether medieval harvesters used any kind of pain relief beyond alcohol. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some monastic records mention harvest salves made from opium poppies, though whether they were for physical pain or the existential kind remains unclear. The church bell tolls noon, and the field workers collapse where they stand. You join Marjorie under the dubious shade of a hawthorn bush, passing a waterskin back and forth. She's peeling a hard-boiled egg with practiced ease, a luxury you eye with barely concealed envy. Noticing your gaze, she breaks it in half with a sigh. Don't make that face, she mutters. You'll put the dogs off their supper. The afternoon passes in a blur of sweat and stubborn vegetation. Just when you think you can't swing the sickle one more time, a shout goes up from the far end of the field. The last sheaf has been cut. A ragged cheer rises as the steward makes his final marks in that damned ledger. Someone produces a makeshift crown of wheat stalks and places it on the miller. S. youngest daughter, this year S. harvest queen, in a tradition older than the village itself. The walk back to the village feels different tonight. There's laughter in the air, backs straightened with pride despite the aches. Even the steward's usual scowl has softened slightly. As you pass the manor, the Lord Steward appears with a cask of ale, his contribution to the celebration. The villagers cheer with genuine enthusiasm for once. The harvest feast is a raucous affair in the churchyard. Makeshift tables groan under bread, cheese, and even a few precious cuts of meat. The harvest queen presides over the festivities with solemn dignity, her wheat crown slightly askew. You find yourself wedged between the blacksmith's apprentice and one of the itinerant workers, passing a shared bowl of something that might be stew or might be a very ambitious soup. As twilight deepens, someone produces a fiddle. The first notes soar into the gathering dark, soon joined by a pipe and the rhythmic clap of hands. You watch as Marjorie drags a blushing old Tom into the clearing to dance, their silhouettes spinning against the firelight. The ale flows freely, and for once, no one mentions tithes or taxes or tomorrow's work. It's nearly midnight when you stumble back to your hovel, pleasantly buzzed and thoroughly exhausted. Your mattress has never felt more welcoming. As you drift off, the fiddle's last notes still echoing in your mind, you realize with some surprise that you'll miss this. Then you immediately reconsider clearly you've had too much ale. The morning after the harvest feast arrives with all the subtlety of a battering ram to the skull. Sunlight stabs through your eyelids like a vengeful dagger, and your mouth tastes like something died in it twice. The remnants of last night's revelry echo in your pounding head as you peel your face off the straw mattress, which somehow gains several new stabby bits overnight. A distant church bell tolls, not the usual call to work, but the slower, more solemn tones signaling Sunday Mass. You groan. Of course, the one morning you could sleep in, the church demands attendance. Your stomach lurches ominously as you sit up, reminding you exactly how much of that Lord's ale you consumed. Even your hair hurts. Dressing is an exercise in misery. Your least filthy tunic smells suspiciously of smoke and spilled ale, and your shoes. You decide barefoot is holier anyway. Stepping outside, you're greeted by a village that looks as rough as you feel. The blacksmith leans against his doorway like a man reconsidering his life choices, while the miller's wife sweeps up broken pottery with the energy of someone plotting murder. The church path is a gauntlet of shame. Widow Agnes glares at you from her garden, no doubt remembering how your drunken rendition of the miller's daughter disturbed her chickens. Even Buttercup eyes you with disapproval as you pass her pen. The only one in worse shape is old Tom, who sways beside the church door like a sapling in a storm. Never again, he croaks, clutching his head. Inside, the church is mercifully dim. The scent of incense does little to mask the collective hangover wafting off the congregation. You slide onto a bench beside Marjorie, who looks surprisingly fresh-faced, until she turns and you see the murderous glint in her bloodshot eyes. If that fiddler starts up again, she whispers, I'm burning his instrument. The priest's Latin drone feels like a physical weight on your skull. You catch maybe one word and 10 something about repentance, which seems fitting. Sunlight streams through the stained glass, painting the floor in colorful patterns that would be beautiful if looking at them didn't make your stomach revolt. Historians still argue whether medieval hangover cures actually worked or just provided new forms of suffering. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some monasteries brewed morning after ales with extra herbs, less for charity and more to keep workers functional after feast days. As the priest's sermon stretches into its second hour, you'd sell your soul for a sip. When Mass finally ends, the village stumbles back into daylight like survivors of a siege. The steward is conspicuously absent, likely nursing his own headache in some dark corner. With no work demanded today, people scatter to various recovery spots. You follow old Tom to the riverbank, where he produces a water skin of something suspiciously clear. Hair of the dog, he rasps, taking a swig before passing it to you. The liquid burns going down, but within minutes your headache recedes from lethal to merely oppressive. You sit in companionable misery, watching ducks paddle past as the village slowly comes back to life around you. The baker's daughter hangs fresh loaves to cool, their yeasty scent a balm to your abused senses. By afternoon, you're almost human again. The tavern has reopened, though the mood is decidedly more subdued than last night. You nurse a weak ale in the corner, listening to snippets of conversation talk of the harvest's yield, speculation about winter stores, and one particularly vivid retelling of your drunken attempt to dance with a hay bale. As evening falls, the village settles into an unusual quiet. The harvest is in, the feast is over, and tomorrow life returns to its normal rhythm of toil and survival. But for tonight, there's peace. Even the ever-present dogs seem content to lounge rather than bark. Back in your hovel, you collapse onto the mattress with a sigh. The straw crackles beneath you, the familiar lumps somehow comforting now. Outside, an owl calls as the last light fades from the sky. You drift off with a single grateful thought. At least tomorrow's work can't possibly be worse than today's hangover. The morning after the Sabbath arrives with a cruel twist. You're not hungover anymore, but now every muscle you abused during harvest has stiffened into what feels like petrified wood. Rolling out of bed requires a series of maneuvers that would make a contortionist wince. Your knees pop like a bowl of medieval Rice Krispies as you shuffle toward the door, your spine making sounds usually associated with failing infrastructure. Outside, the village hums with renewed purpose. The harvest may be over, but the work never stops. Now it's time to prepare for winter. The steward stands near the granary, his ledger open to a fresh page, already calculating how many bushels will go to the Lord, how many to the church, and how few will remain for actual survival. You join the line of villagers waiting their turn, your stomach already sinking at the math to come. When you finally reach the front, the steward barely glances up. 3 bushels owed, he declares, his quill scratching across parchment like a death sentence. 3 bushels. That's nearly half your share from the harvest. You open your mouth to protest, then think better of it. The stocks by the churchyard stand as a silent reminder of what happens to complainers. The granary is a marvel of medieval engineering, cool, dry, and smelling richly of grain and earth. As you scoop your measly portion into a sack, you notice the Lord's men loading wagon after wagon with the village's hard-won harvest. One particularly fine-looking sheaf tumbles to the ground, and you resist the urge to pocket it like a starving squirrel. Historians still argue whether the medieval tithe system was exploitative or just brutally pragmatic. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some peasants would secretly mix chaff with their grain to make their tithes look more substantial, a risky game when the penalty could be losing a hand. You eye your sack of grain with newfound respect. At least it's all edible. The rest of the morning is spent hauling and storing your winter provisions. Your grain joins a pathetic little pile in your hovel's corner, barely enough to fill a basket. The math is unavoidable. This won't last until Yuletide, let alone spring. You now need to supplement with whatever you can forage or trade, which explains the sudden popularity of the woods beyond the village. Afternoon finds you in the forest with a group of villagers, all scouring the undergrowth like hungry ghosts. Marjorie shows you which mushrooms won't kill you, while old Tom demonstrates how to set simple snares for rabbits. Your first attempt collapses pathetically. earning a snort from a watching child. Maybe stick to gathering, Marjorie suggests kindly, pointing you toward a patch of late-season berries. As the sun begins to dip, your basket holds a meager assortment, some mushrooms, a handful of nuts, a few scraggly greens. It's not much, but combined with your grain ration, it might stretch a few more weeks. You're turning toward home when a rustling in the bush sends everyone freezing. A deer emerges a young doe, her coat glowing in the golden light. For a breathless moment, she watches you with liquid eyes. Then, with a flick of her tail, she's gone. No one moves. Hunting deer is strictly forbidden. They're the Lord's property, and poaching carries a penalty no one wants to think about. The unspoken agreement hangs heavy as the group disperses. Everyone suddenly very interested in their own patches of forest. Back in the village, the autumn chill has taken on a sharper edge. Smoke curls from cottage chimneys as people begin lighting their evening fires. You pause by the blacksmith's forge, soaking in its residual warmth as he repairs a plowshare. "Winter's coming early," he remarks, nodding toward the geese flying in tight formation overhead. Their honking sounds almost like laughter at your expense. Your evening meal is a thin gruel made from your precious grain stores, flavored with a few of your foraged mushrooms. It's not filling, but it's hot, which is enough for now. As you eat, you watch through your open door as the village settles into night children being called inside, shutters closing against the cold, the occasional burst of laughter from the tavern. Later, as you huddle under your thin blanket, a new sound joins the night, the distant howl of wolves. Closer than last week. You pull the blanket tighter and try not to think about hungry predators, both animal and human. Tomorrow will bring more preparations, more calculations, more quiet desperation. But for tonight, there is just the crackle of your dying fire and the growing certainty that this winter will test you like never before. The first frost arrives overnight, painting the village in glittering white and turning your morning breath into visible clouds. You wake to find your water bucket frozen solid, a crystalline middle finger from nature herself. The shock of cold air as you leave your hovel feels like a slap to the face, instantly clearing any lingering sleep from your eyes. Winter preparations kick into frantic gear. The blacksmith's hammer rings from dawn till dusk as he repairs tools before the deep cold sets in. Women gather in clusters, spinning wool with fingers flying winter is coming, and with it, the need for every scrap of warmth. You join a group collecting reeds by the riverbank, your numb fingers struggling to tie them into bundles for thatch repairs. The river itself has taken on a sluggish, glassy quality, its banks fringed with delicate ice crystals that crunch underfoot. Old Tom shows you how to chink your walls with a mixture of mud and straw. Unless you fancy waking up snowed in, he chuckles, his own breath puffing like a small steam engine. The work is messy and cold, the mud freezing on your hands almost instantly. By midday, your fingers are so stiff you can barely grip the trowel, but at least one wall of your hovel looks marginally less drafty. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually had effective ways to combat winter bite, or just suffered through with stoic resignation. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some would heat stones in the fire and wrap them in cloth to use as bed warmers, medieval hot water bottles, minus the water. As afternoon fades, a shout goes up from the edge of the village the salt merchant's wagon has arrived. Its timing impeccable as always. The entire village descends on it like crows on carrion. Salt means preserved meat, fish, and maybe, if you're very lucky, a slightly less monotonous winter diet. You join the scrum, your carefully hoarded coins burning a hole in your pouch. The merchant, a wiry man with eyes like a ferret's, knows his market well. His prices are steep, his measures generous only to those who can afford extras. When it's your turn, you meekly request a small portion, watching with dismay as your meager coins disappear into his coffers for what looks like barely a handful. "Come now," he leers, holding up a string of dried fish like a carnival barker. "Surely you want something with flavor?" The price he quotes would clean out your remaining savings. You decline with a tight smile, already calculating how to stretch your pitiful salt ration. The walk back to your hovel is accompanied by the merry jingle of the salt merchant, its departing wagon, and the hollow grumbling of your stomach. Your meager purchases salt, a few nails, and a scrap of leather for patching your shoes feel laughably inadequate against the coming winter. Dinner is a thin broth made from the last of your autumn vegetables, flavored with a single precious pinch of salt. As you eat, you watch through your doorway as the village prepares for night. Smoke curls thicker from chimneys now, the scent of burning peat heavy in the air. A group of children chase each other home, their laughter sharp in the cold air, their breath trailing behind them like tiny ghosts. Later, as you bank your fire for the night, you notice the stars have taken on a hard, bright quality, the kind that promises serious cold. Your breath frosts the air even inside now, and you layer on every scrap of clothing you own before burrowing into your straw mattress. The stones you heated earlier provide fleeting comfort, already cooling against your feet. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls closer tonight. You pull your thin blanket tighter and try not to think about the long months ahead. Outside, the first snowflakes begin to fall, silent and deadly as a thief in the night. The snow has settled in for good now, blanketing the village in a hush so deep you can hear the creak of branches under their white burden. Morning light filters through the cracks in your walls, painting stripes of pale gold across the frozen dirt floor. You burrow deeper into your nest of blankets and straw, chasing the fading warmth like a miser hoarding coins. Outside, the world is eerily still. No rooster crows this morning, likely frozen into grumpy silence. The usual village sounds are muffled, absorbed by the thick snow. Only the occasional plume of smoke from cottage chimneys betrays signs of life. When you finally brave the cold to relieve yourself, the shock of freezing air steals your breath. The outhouse seat is a tortured device of ice, and you conduct your business with record speed. Breakfast is a handful of nuts and the last withered apple from your autumn foraging, eaten while huddled over your meager fire. The flames devour the wood greedily, offering little in return. You'll need to brave the woods for more soon, a terrifying prospect with the snow this deep. For now, you ration each log like the precious commodity it's become. The day's work is different, now slower, more interior. You sit by the fire, repairing tools with frozen fingers, the leather laces stiff and uncooperative. Your breath frosts the air with each exhale, and you find yourself moving as little as possible to conserve warmth. Outside, the occasional villager braves the cold to check on livestock or empty chamber pots, their movements slow and deliberate in the deep snow. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were truly harder or if modern humans have simply gone soft. But here is a quirky tidbit. Some peasants would bring their livestock into their homes during extreme cold, meaning your winter roommate might be a goat with attitude. You glance around your tiny hovel and thank whatever saints might be listening that you don't own any animals. By midday, the cold has seeped into your bones despite the fire. You decide to risk a trip to the well, bundling yourself in every layer you own. The path is treacherous, hidden under snow that creaks ominously with each step. At the well, you find Marjorie already drawing water, her nose and cheeks red with cold. "Old Tom's sick," she says without preamble, her breath puffing white. "Fever." The words hang between you, heavy with unspoken fear. Winter illness is a death sentence for many. The cold saps strength, while the close quarters spread sickness like gossip. You nod silently and take your turn at the rope, your numb fingers slipping on the icy surface. The water, when it comes up, is so cold it burns. You fill your bucket carefully, trying not to spill wet clothes in this weather would be disastrous. The walk back is slower, more cautious, your precious cargo sloshing slightly with each step. Back in your hovel, you melt snow over the fire to supplement your water supply, watching as the crystals collapse into liquid with grudging slowness. The afternoon passes in a haze of cold and monotony, mending clothes, stirring the pot, occasionally standing to stop feeling back into your feet. As dusk falls, you venture out once more to check on old Tom. His cottage smells of herbs and sickness, the air thick with the scent of fever. Widow Agnes is there, mixing something at his hearth, her face grim. You leave the small bundle of firewood you brought without speaking. There, nothing to say that the crackle of the flames won't say better. Night comes early these days, the darkness pressing against your walls like a living thing. You bank the fire carefully, ensuring it will last until morning, then burrow into your bedding. The cold is a constant companion now, creeping in the moment you stop moving. Outside, the wind begins to howl, rattling your poorly fitted door in its frame. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf answers the wind's call, a long, mournful sound that raises the hair on your neck. You pull your blanket over your head, creating a tiny cocoon of slightly warmer air, and try not to think about the months of winter still ahead. The fire pops softly, its light dancing across the walls like a living thing. As sleep finally claims you, one thought lingers: spring will come eventually. It has to, and so we leave you there, curled tight against the winter's bite. The fire's glow painting shadows on walls that have seen countless such nights before. The medieval world was harsh, yes, every day a battle against cold, hunger, and the relentless march of time. But there was warmth, too, in the shared struggle and the quiet moments between the toil. Picture your small fire, its embers pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. The snow continues to fall outside, blanketing the village in a silence so deep you can almost hear the stars. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world waits patiently for spring, for the first green shoots to push through the frost, for the rivers to shake off their icy slumber. You've survived more than you thought possible these past months. The harvest, the hunger, the bone-deep cold, each has left its mark, but here you are still. There's a strength in that, a quiet resilience that hums beneath the weariness. Let the fire's crackle soothe you now, its warmth a promise that winter won't last forever. The night stretches on, vast and star-strewn above your tiny shelter, but morning will come. It always does. Breathe deep. Rest. However far away it seems, spring is already stirring in the earth's memory. For now let the snow hush the world to sleep, and dream of greener days ahead. End of script. Sweet dreams.